The year is 1812. Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, soon to be Duke of Wellington, has been fighting for 4 years with his Spanish and Portuguese allies against the occupying French forces. Having captured Ciudad Rodrigo and Badajoz on the Portuguese border at the start of the year, Wellesley advanced in central Spain against the French army of Portugal. Unable to bring the French to battle, he is forced to withdraw via the town of Salamanca towards Ciudad Rodrigo. However, the 22nd of July 1812 proved to be a day of unexpected pain for the French army, as the combined English, Spanish and Portuguese armies secured an overwhelming victory. The rest of this presentation is set in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Salamanca.
Hello and welcome to Battle of the Day. I'm Zach White. Today we look at the Battle of Salamanca and ask, did the Allies win or the French lose this pivotal battle? But first, here's what's coming up on today's show. Our military experts Dan Schuster and Richard Brown join me to discuss where it all went wrong for the French. Our war correspondent Jamie Bush has some exclusive interviews with the Duke of Wellington, Marshal Marmont and General Clausel. And finally, Jamie, Josh, Ethan and Will answer some of the viewers' questions and comments about the battle and the wider situation in Spain and Portugal. All that to come, but we start with a roundup of the action. The day began with the French army under Marshal Marmont continuing to outmaneuver the Allies. After skirmishing around the chapel of Nuestra Senora de la Peña, Wellington occupied the Lesser Arapal, on the right of the map, whilst Marmont occupied the Greater Arapal, swung the bulk of the French army of Portugal around behind it, and marched west to outflank the Allies. Wellington responded by forming a defensive line along the heights above the village of Los Arapals. However, when two French divisions marched so far along the Monte de Azan that they became isolated, Wellington attacked and routed them with the 3rd and 5th Divisions. Meanwhile, Marshal Marmont and General Bonnet, the commanders of the French army, were wounded, leaving the French leadless at this crucial point in the battle. However, Allied attacks on the centre of the French army were initially broken. The French exploited this with a counterattack in the centre, forcing Wellington to commit part of his reserves. These in turn broke the French. With the French left and centre broken, Ferry's division made a heroic stand to cover the French retreat, holding off a huge part of the Allied army for a crucial hour until darkness fell. Total losses for the French were 11,790 men killed or taken prisoner, compared to Allied losses of 4,809 killed or wounded. Well, I'm joined now by Dan Schuster and Richard Brown. Gentlemen, welcome. What's your reaction to this outcome?
This result comes as a great shock to people. The French had dominated the field after Marmont's daring stroke across the Duero on the 16th of July, pushing Wellington back towards Salamanca via Peninisuar and San Cristobal. Then Wellington, he saw an opportunity. Marmont pushed Thumier and McHugh's divisions too far away from the rest of the army, failed to realise this had happened. Wellington took advantage. This is definitely one of his greatest victories, Zach.
I think this is much more a case of Marmont making a hugely costly mistake there. If it wasn't for the overextension of his forces, then I'm sure Wellington would have been pushed back towards Ciudad Rodrigo. We also have to take into account the sheer bad luck of the French army in losing 2 of their commanders in such quick succession.
Yes, on that note, we're now going to cross to our war correspondent Jamie Bush, who's talking to the former commander of the Army of Portugal, Marshal Auguste Marmont, Duke of Ragusa. Jamie.
Marshal Marmont, I can see you've been wounded. How serious is the injury?
Well, I picked this up early in the afternoon when I was mounting my horse. An exploding shell went off beside me and knocked me down. The arm is broken and I'm fairly sure some bruised ribs as well. I think the surgeons want to amputate, but I'm not entirely sure yet. It is quite unfortunate it happened at such a crucial point in the campaign, but we'll just have to see how it goes.
Well, I hope you recover swiftly. I have to ask the question that everyone is wondering. Why did you extend your left so far during the battle?
Well, my actual orders to McHugh and Thumier were for them to advance to the left of Bonnet's division, not advance as far as they did. I intended to continue outflanking the British and attack their rearguard as they retreated. The fault is entirely my subordinates.
You're clearly disappointed with your subordinates' performance today. Do you honestly feel that Clausel can still take his army forwards?
Well, we have clearly had some low-power performances, but I have every bit of confidence in Clausel's ability to pick up the pieces in the coming weeks.
What would you have done if you hadn't been wounded?
Well, it seems quite easy to say in hindsight, but I was trying to stop Thomier's advance and strengthen my centre, particularly the gap between Hume and the Great Arapal. Ultimately, though, the strategy would have been the same.
What impact do you think this will have on your career? Surely this defeat strengthens your critics' claims that Napoleon should not have given the army of Portugal to someone so young.
No, I don't think this will have any effect on my career. The Emperor has never had any reason to doubt his confidence in me. This defeat was clearly the fault of my over-eager subordinates, and if I hadn't been wounded, the end result would have been very different. Obviously, a lot depends on how my arm recovers, but I'm quite confident that when it does, I will be re-given command.
Marshal Marmont, all the best with your injury. Thank you for speaking to us. Back to you.
Dan, how do you assess Marmont's ability to salvage his career after this defeat?
Well, Marmont is Napoleon's protege. Clearly the Emperor will not be satisfied with today's outcome, but I feel Napoleon is far more concerned with events in Russia at the current time. I mean, Napoleon knows he can trust Marmont. I mean, he's never given him any reason not to in the past. He's in this campaign, he's consistently outmaneuvered and outwitted Wellington up until this point. So I'm sure he'll be given the chance to salvage his career.
Sorry to have to interrupt you there. Jamie has just found General Clausel, who took over from Marshal Marmont as commander of the Army of Portugal. Jamie.
General Clausel, you must be very busy. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Obviously, you were supposed to succeed Marshal Marmont after he was wounded, but General Bonnet was forced to take over because you could not be found. Where were you?
Well, I had actually been wounded myself by a shell fragment. It hasn't bandaged. At the end of the day, though, I can't be blamed for that. It is unfortunate, but that's the way it goes.
In hindsight, do you regret your decision to launch a counter-attack when the attack by the Allied 4th Division collapsed?
Well, to be honest with you, it wasn't really a conscious decision. It just developed. It seemed to be the logical thing to do at the time. And I think we would have been happier when we made the move if my division hadn't been tied up with the Allied 3rd Division. Bonnet's men had to make the best of it on their own, and when it came down to it, it wasn't enough. At the end of the day, though, it could have gone either way, so I wouldn't say it was the wrong decision. It was just an opportunity to save the day, and it didn't work, so we'll just have to see how it goes next time.
Where will the French army go from there?
Well, obviously, we have to regroup and consider our options. At the end of the day, we have to dust ourselves down and be ready to carry on. Obviously, it's going to take some time, but the main thing is that we come back and stronger, and we learn for the future.
General Clausel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Richard, it's interesting listening to that interview that Clausel seems very optimistic about the future of the Army of Portugal. Do you think that optimism is justified?
Well, there's no doubting that he has a huge task trying to regroup this army. On the 22nd of July alone, 6th Division suffered heavy casualties and loss, and that will have a big psychological impact on the troop. Reinforcements are scarce. Napoleon's taken a large chunk of his troops from Spain to go in his campaign in Russia. But I think we have to remember the Army of Portugal still has 35,000 troops. On the flip side for Clausel, if he regroups with it, I believe he could get to return to fighting by August, maybe. Marshal Marmont, after Massena's defeat at Fuente de Honoro, was able to regroup in less than a month. But cynic could say that the defeat wasn't on the same scale as Salamanca. But I believe this defeat could be less overwhelming than it initially appears at.
So is Clausel up to the challenge, would you say?
He seems to have the ability and the right mindset, and that will count for a great deal in this theatre of warfare. He's 2 years younger than Marmont, but he's still young and enthusiastic, and that will count for a great deal looking forward. I have full confidence he can restore the discipline that the troops have.
We're now going to return to Jamie, who has a very special guest for us. Jamie, tell us more.
Thanks, Zach. I'm here now with His Grace, the Duke of Wellington, commander of the British and Portuguese forces in our Iberian Peninsula. Your Grace, thank you for joining us. Congratulations on your victory today. I'm sure you're delighted.
Thank you, sir. One is most satisfied with today's events.
So 4 hours ago, could you have envisaged this result?
Well, naturally one can never prophesy with any certainty the outcome of any engagement of this nature. I understandably had resolved to retreat on Ciudad Rodrigo unless a favourable opportunity presented itself. However, this was merely a continuation of my intention throughout the campaign to only engage in hostilities if circumstances were right.
And what was your key decision today?
In these engagements, it is rather difficult for one to pinpoint the crucial decisions of the day. I feel my response to Marmont's error of extending his left was important for ensuring the day was ours. Equally, the manner in which I deployed the troops permitted me to salvage the day when the 4th Division collapsed.
What do you think of the way that your troops fought?
Well, clearly the men have conducted themselves with the distinction to be expected of the soldiers of the British Army. There was an unfortunate affair in the field with the 4th Division, but officers rectified this and battalions regrouped and returned to the field. The men have proven themselves capable of fighting an aggressive engagement and so I am very satisfied with them this day.
Do you think that this battle will silence those who have claimed that you are only capable of fighting defensive battles?
Well, clearly, none of these so-called critics have considered my engagement with the French at Oporto in May 1809. Nonetheless, I can be satisfied with the knowledge that I have indeed attacked and caused the French much distress as a result. I also feel that this has shown the wisdom in my decision not to attack the French earlier in the campaign when they confronted me at San Cristobal.
There have been rumours that the Spanish have abandoned Olga the Tormes. Will this take the shine off of your victory?
Well, indeed, the actions of the Spanish are of great concern and may impede my objective of the complete destruction of the French. Nonetheless, it is my intention to continue to pursue the French and inflict further losses upon them should the opportunity arise. Would you excuse me?
Your Grace, Duke of Wellington, thank you. His Grace, obviously, very good man.
Thank you, Jamie. Dan, we all picked up on Wellington's attitude there. Would you say that's typical of him?
Well, I mean, Wellington's notorious for his lack of interest in the mob, as he calls them, largely because of the fickleness of their support. But that is a shame, as he could harness their support as a means of placing pressure on the government, particularly as his brother, the second Earl of Mornington, is not part of the current government, and so therefore Wellington has less influence than he previously had.
Richard, Jamie raised the issue of critics with Wellington. Do you think this victory will secure him against future criticism?
I think it's doubtful it will completely silence critics, one never does, but the French will now be much more fearful of him, and that counts for a great deal looking forward. This will destroy their perception of him as a defensive general. I mean, this now does come with potential downsides. You know, the French are now less likely to offer him a battle, you know, so it's hard to get a decisive result, and they're now more likely to combine other forces within Spain to try and push him out of the country altogether. I mean, you've got to remember that they still have a huge advantage in numbers. There's still 200,000 French troops roaming around the peninsula, Zach.
After having listened to Marmont and Clausel, would you still see this as one of Wellington's finest victories?
Oh no, absolutely, Zach. I mean, Wellington kept his army under extreme and careful control, so when he saw a chance to strike, he was able to do it. The way he deployed his army was faultless, the way he went about his business, faultless, especially when you look at his 3rd Division, Zach.
Well, what about the 4th Division, though, Richard? I mean, it was one of the weakest units in the entire Allied army, and yet he placed it in the front line and used it to attack Clausel. I think if the debacle in the centre was inevitable after such a poor use of his forces.
No, I mean, Dan's got a fair point there. It was an unusual mistake by Wellington, but in comparison with Marmont, his positioning was excellent. When Wellington tried to attack Marmont's left, the French, you know, Marmont had spread his army in a 6-mile-long loop, Zach, and that's just asking for trouble.
We shouldn't suggest that the French defeat was inevitable, and nor should we forget the importance of the soldiers. If it wasn't for the bravery of the British and Portuguese troops, then Wellington's movements would have counted for nothing, and we could quite easily be looking at a French victory here.
Dan, we've mentioned how Marmont had dominated strategy after his daring strike across the Duero on the 16th of July. What do you think caused him to eventually make this mistake with his left flank, if indeed it was his mistake?
I think we have to recognise he was at least partly at fault. I mean, if nothing else, he should have ensured that he had enough control over his army to rectify any overextension of his army, regardless of his claims. With regards to why he made the mistake, I mean, it's been a very long campaign, and I think ultimately he saw his goal of pushing the Allies back to the Portuguese border in sight, and I think simply he lost his concentration and became too eager.
We've concentrated a great deal on the left and the centre of the battlefield. What are your thoughts about the retreat?
Well, Wellington made some key errors with the retreat, particularly in sending men towards Huerta when the French were retreating towards Alba. I mean, even if he didn't know that the Spanish had evacuated the castle there, it was bizarre to send men in completely the wrong direction. I think he was as much at fault as the Spanish.
I think Dan needs to remember that, you know, there would be a limit to how quickly the British could pursue the French here. I mean, yes, they won the battle, but they put just as big an exertion in to do so. They will be tired. They will need time to regroup as well.
So, what's our final assessment? Is this a British victory or a French loss?
It's a French loss, Zach. I mean, if it wasn't for the Marmont's overextension of his forces, then Wellington wouldn't have been attacked, and there wouldn't have been a battle, and we wouldn't be sitting here today.
Marmont made some crucial errors. I mean, I agree with Dan there, but it took Wellington's skill and his composure to take full capitalisation of these. I think maybe we could say it's an Allied rather than British victory, you know, and that's considering the Spanish abandonment of Albert's Tormes.
Dan, Richard, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Now, we've been inundated by viewers' comments about the battle. Maria from Cadiz says, Viva Los Angeles, Viva Wellington, God preserve Spain's liberators. General Foy, who's serving with the French army of Portugal, says this battle raises Wellington almost to the level of Marlborough. It was a battle in the style of Frederick the Great. Now we hand over to our war correspondent, Jamie.